policies, feminist and decolonial. And I am so excited to be hosting a discussion on such a dynamic and powerful topic. My name is Rosalind Helfand, and I am the thematic lead of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, which is a project of UN Women. It's convened by UN Women under Generation Equality. And we actually, the organizers of today's event, so Women Engage for a Common Future and Oxfam International, are commitment makers under this global multi-stakeholder partnership that is this Action Coalition. And I'm also grateful to our hosts, the BENELUX Pavilion. Belgium and Netherlands are also government commitment makers to the Action Coalition. So thank you to our organizers and hosts for hosting this. And I want to just briefly talk about why we're making this connection between this discussion and me as the moderator who heads up this Action Coalition with UN Women. We have priority action areas of this Action Coalition, and these include gender-responsive, just transitions that really benefit grassroots and local women as well as youth. We also have action priorities around accessibility to decision-making spaces and inclusiveness for finance, and really making sure that we are not only not leaving people behind, but we're not leaving women and girls behind in all of their diversity. And so we're going to dive into these connections today. We're looking at this perspective, this lens of these Benelux energy and climate policies, but we're going to connect this lens to the broader global perspective and how these policies are important, whether you're looking out from the global north or you're looking out from the global south, how we should be connecting, how we should be dialoguing, and how we should be thinking about these intersections between these Benelux countries and other countries in the world. And so we have a very, very diverse panel today and a diverse set of perspectives. We're going to start out with just some background from each of our panelists. Then we're going to go into a very dynamic back and forth discussion amongst them. And then we're going to open it up for what we hope will be a really fun audience Q&A. And we'll wrap this up with some action items that we hope will be meaningful for this COP and beyond this COP as well. And some of the topics that we're going to cover include holding this conversation in terms of the energy relationship between the global north and south, whether it's addressing fossil fuel dependency or transitioning to renewables or protecting human rights and gender equality. For example, we might touch on the impacts of supply chains, or where are the job opportunities for women and girls, or how do we ensure the safety and security of women and girls during transitions who speak up or who engage in decision-making spaces. We'll also be looking to NGOs on how this policy level work is linked to the work on the ground, and what does accountability look like as we move forward. How is this part of NDC's national adaptation plans and the national biodiversity and strategies and action plans? These are potential linkages that we're going to make. And we're also going to touch on what does it even mean to be feminist and decolonial. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers, and I'll introduce each of them, and then they're going to talk a little bit about their perspectives on this and what they're doing right now. And the first speaker that I will introduce is Alba Soray Perez-Terran. She's the Climate Change Policy Advisor with Oxfam Belgium. So Alba, you've been analyzing the current situation on gender disaggregated data in Belgium. Can you tell us more about your findings on gaps and strengths? And also, how do you see this data as connected to the feminist and decolonial perspective, including regarding countries with ties to Belgium? So over to you, Alba.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being here also with us. We decided to analyze the data also in Belgium because it has been often the case that we have cooperation policies saying there are countries where there is gender inequalities and we need to support the women in other countries, and we are not looking at our own issues and we are not doing very well. And so we analyzed the different sources that exist. It has taken a very long time. More than 8 months of work. We've had a colleague fully working on that. And she has analyzed more than 100 sources, and it has been very difficult to find information already linking gender, climate, and energy. And many times we had to do the linkages ourselves. And what we saw is that there is data on health, on labor, around the pay gap, because it has been sectors more commonly addressed in policy positions and so on. But other issues like agriculture, ownership, transport, consumption, taxation, and so on, there is not so much information. I wanted to share with you some of the figures that we got. We had to use sometimes international reports, sometimes European, sometimes national Belgian, regional. For those who are from Belgium, you know how difficult getting data and the governance situation and centralizing information is. And so, some interesting data that we were finding is, around the energy consumption between men and women, linked, of course, because the stereotypes and the behavioral patterns, also the more purchasing power that they might have. We also see that in the energy sector, there is a bigger gender employment gap than in other sectors. And so that's also important to have for the transition. And we also were looking at the impacts of climate change in Belgium. It's of course less intense than in other countries, but we also wanted to have this perspective. And it's difficult to have for Belgium, but so we were getting data sometimes from other countries, and we saw that there is a rise in feminicides during heat waves, and we have also seen that in other places, right? After disasters, there is gender-based violence that also increases. So that's also something that is there and that is not well known. And because we are speaking a lot of fossil fuel sector in this COP, we also tried to have a look at the 10 Belgian companies investing in fossil fuels, and none of them is managed by women. I think that's not a surprise, and that's, for us, what that tells is that solving the climate crisis and the fossil fuel crisis is also a way to solve the inequality crisis and the gender crisis. I have 1 minute, all right. There is, as I said at the beginning, there is also a lack of structure. It's not systematically collected, is not intersectional at all. So we might have data on women and data on disability, but not on women and disability. There is very few information on LGBTQI women as well. And when it comes to ethnicity and migration background and so on, it's also not being addressed, whereas we know that in the care work, and in any other way, but in care work also is very relevant, because many times it's also people with a migration background. So I think I'll leave it here to the next speaker.
Fantastic, thank you, Alba. Our next speaker is, yes, please clap. And also I want to take a moment to recognize that we have a live stream audience as well. So hello, live stream audience, and welcome. So our next speaker is Annabelle Kennedy. Annabelle is the project coordinator at Women Engaged for a Common Future, WECF International in the Netherlands. And Annabelle, you've been following the recent implementation of the Dutch feminist foreign policy. Can you tell us about what feminist foreign policy should mean for the energy transition, both in the Netherlands and globally? What are the limitations and opportunities? And why is it so vital that the energy transition be feminist and decolonial? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rosalind. Oh, I sound very loud. So in 2020, and please excuse me looking at my speaking notes for the time, the Netherlands joined a raft of countries that are committing to a feminist foreign policy. They've decided to conduct that under 4 R's, so rights, resources, representation, and reality check. So what does it look like in communities? So I really think on the resources and the rights, it's really vital for the Dutch governments and really all global North governments to ensure that climate financing is really reaching grassroots communities, women and feminist-led organizations, which we know is really not the case. All funding and implementation of energy and climate projects, interventions, must have the meaningful participation and leadership of women and girls in all the diversity at all stages and at all levels. And there really needs to be a robust gender analysis and risk assessment of any energy and climate policy. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that risk assessment is so vital. I think we've all heard it loud and clear at this COP. Any climate and energy policy, especially for the global north countries like the Netherlands, like Belgium, like Luxembourg, needs to be based on a fast, full, feminist, fair, funded, and forever phase out of fossil fuels. This is really the bare minimum of what it means to have a feminist and decolonial energy and climate policy, because if we don't do that, we're not going to avoid any of the harm that is already being most felt by grassroots, frontline communities, especially women in all their diversity, indigenous peoples, and they're just going to continue being affected by this fossil-fueled crisis. So that's the bare minimum. I want to say one thing, that because actually just before the COP and during it, actually, there's already been some promising movements. This year, under huge civil society pressure, the Netherlands has actually decided to start stepping away from fossil fuel subsidies, which were actually calculated this year at 40 billion euros. And just a few days ago, the Netherlands launched an international coalition to phase out fossil subsidies, which have been also signed onto by Belgium and Luxembourg. I think that, and we'll hear from, I think, some of our speakers more about that, it cannot be that cannot be where it ends. There has to be really a serious discussion, not only about what we do going forward, but also addressing the historical harm, including seeing climate finance not as a shared burden, but also as reparations for historical responsibility. So that's kind of the foreign elements. Within the Netherlands itself, the elephant in the room of energy consumption needs to be addressed. I do think that's one of the limitations, could be one of the limitations of the FFP, feminist foreign policy, because it looks very specifically at external action and not at domestic use. And I think when we look at the domestic energy, green energy, just transition, none of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, none of these countries in the global north can have their energy transition at the expense of other countries. What we see of so-called sacrifice zones, we know that the mining for energy transition minerals and metals are often happening in indigenous territories, and there's a wealth of evidence about how mining, extractivism for these minerals and metals really bring these attendant risks of gender-based violence, threats to women, environmental human rights defenders, and the environmental impacts of driving deforestation, polluting water sources. I think I'm running out of time, so I just want to say, in order to be feminist and decolonial, I don't think it's about inserting women, girls, and all their diversity, indigenous people, global south communities into business as usual. We need system change, and there needs to be really a radical rethink of energy use and energy policy. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much.
And I didn't change my slides at all, sorry.
Yes. Yes, and thank you so much for making those linkages and also bringing up systems change. So I think these are really critical points for really thinking about the bigger picture as well. So I'm going to go now to Jonita Babire, who is the founder of Girls for Climate Action in Uganda, which again, I think that we're moving in a really great direction these days, where we're bringing Global South and Global North activists and leaders together more to have more inclusive conversations, which is, I think, a very positive direction. So Jonita, who is also a leader in the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition, how does Girls for Climate Action support locally led climate solutions, particularly those that involve transitioning to sustainable energy practices? And how do you think these should be connected to feminist and decolonial policies from countries like Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg?
Thank you so much, Rosalind. So again, Girls for Climate Action is a young feminist-led organization that is really pushing for or demanding for climate justice. But the way we do this is to center our realities and experiences in all that we do, because for us, it's more than just written climate science. It's what we are going through every day. So for us at Girls for Climate Action, whatever the experience is, the reality is what we provide solutions for. And one of those has been energy as well. So at Girls for Climate Action, we are engaging young women and girls in creating energy solutions. And we are getting the rural communities, the indigenous communities, the girls living in the slum areas to be able to create solutions to the energy poverty in there. So part of the work that we've done is engaging in policy at the local level. So we run a Climate Corps Fellowship that equips young women and girls, basically also adolescents, in trying to push for local climate policies, engaging in formulation, strengthening, and as well as implementation, but also protecting the different ecosystems within their different communities in whichever way that they can do it. Could be through placards, it could be through social media, but also be just calling out these leaders at rallies as well. So we are having COPs as our ambassadors in different communities to push for these particular policies. On the other hand, we also have solutions that are very locally led. So I try to put together an entire process of how this happens until we arrive at the stoves that we have here. So our communities use the three stones fire for cooking, and these take a lot of firewood. And so what we've done, and also with these 3 stones, children, when I was 5 years, I would still cook food and make sure it's ready. And the situation in which you're actually cooking is very dangerous for a child. And so many women have been having challenges of their children getting burnt with these 3-stone fire cook stoves. And so we are creating these improved cook stoves where it's safe to do, but the entire process doesn't even need 1 shilling. It's basically from local material. Even where they're supposed to use cement, they are using potato leaves, and they're getting water out of that, and they're mixing it with the soil and making these stoves. So these stoves, compared to the 3-stone, that can use 10 logs per day, these can use 3 logs per day, fire logs per day, to make meals for the whole day. So this is reducing on the burden that they have to look for firewood at longer journeys, but also it's reducing on the risks of their children. Even women right now can put their food and, get involved in different activities as well without getting worried that maybe a kitchen is going to get burnt, etc. So with these kinds of technology, we are also bringing in briquettes, but also in slum areas, we are doing biogas home kits, whereby the waste from kitchen is being transformed into biogas. So this is working more in the urban areas, but for this, it's working mainly in the rural areas. So women right now, if we talk about I don't know how to move this, really. How do you do this? Just move. Okay. Yeah, so far we have built 2,032 households that are having stoves. And also we have, now the women, when they learn how to do these stoves, they're also building stoves for schools and hospitals so that they can also get away from the dirty cooking. And we have 75 schools that have been built the stoves for by the women. And also 120 households are using briquettes. And we have 15 households in slum areas having biogas home kits. And 10 teams in these communities are doing this as a business. So they're earning out of building stoves for communities and schools and hospitals. That's basically what you're doing.
Thank you. And I wanted to know if you wanted to comment at all on how you see the work that you're doing as linked to these energy policies in the larger context.
So in a larger context, so in Uganda, we've tried as much as possible to connect our climate corps to the youth in the Netherlands. So we have a partnership called the We Are Tomorrow Global Partnership, where we are engaging youth in the Netherlands together with the youth in Uganda to be able to share on different practices. But this has also made our corps get closer to the Ministry of Netherlands and the embassy there, and they're really pushing. And In 2020, we hosted, together with the Netherlands in Uganda, a consultation on the nationally determined contributions, where it was really inspired by the Netherlands. But so for us, and in this particular document, position document that we created, the agenda, it has a lot of different ideas shared from the Netherlands and also youth from Uganda, and seeing how all these policies can feed into each other, but also trying to see how we can together try to achieve the different policies that we are creating. But also when the government see that you have allies, it's very easy for them to actually jump on whatever you're demanding for, compared to when you're alone in this situation.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanita. Round of applause for Joanita. So now I'm very honored to turn it over to Titi Soentoro, who's the policy advisor at, do you say AKSI or AXI?
AXI.
AXI, the Gender, Social, and Ecological Justice in Indonesia. And Titi, you have been implementing feminist participatory action research about different energy projects in Indonesia. Could you briefly explain what that looks like and what lessons or tools have been learned from this that you think should inform policy in the global north countries like BENELUX countries? And how do you think Netherlands' colonial history in Indonesia needs to shape its current approach to climate policy, including climate finance? So starting with what does the work that you're doing look like, and what lessons or tools should we be getting from this for global north countries?
That's a lot of questions.
It's a big question. You can do it.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
So women in our country or in the developing country, they experience climate change. And they also experience the climate response measure. But when they experience climate change, they only know there is sea level rise, long drought, and so on and so on. So I know a community affected by sea level rise in northern part of Java Islands, and they asked for help to the village leaders by saying, so we have to move because water kept coming from the sea. And the village had said, you know, it's God's will, it's natural disaster, we don't know how to help you. So this is the situations of many women, that they experience the disasters, but they don't know the link that there is a groups, countries that are responsible for that. So if they know who are responsible, they can organize, mobilize themselves to go to the government asking for reparation, asking for help, because they have to move. They don't have lands anymore. The other examples is women affected by the mud pollution of geothermal exploration. They didn't know any information. Suddenly, you know, in one day, the water from their tap was polluted, brownish water. And they have to do investigation going up to the mountain, and finally they got the information. It is mud pollution of exploration of geothermal. And geothermal is promoted highly by World Bank, GCF, ADB, and still also accepted by the northern country as a solution. But for people, it's not solution. 7 years after the pollution, they still cannot recover. So who will pay, you know, the loss of livelihood that they experience? All the investment are gone. So we document all the experiences of women. So feminist participatory action research is actually a documentation process by empowering women, and also by identifying changes that in their life because of a projects, because of the climate. So they speak from their experience by saying, you know, the changes in my life, the changes in my body, it is because of climate and because of the projects. And then they empower, because they have the experience, they really have the courage to talk. I need this, I need that, I fight for this because my children's life. So that's the basic actually. And I think related to the historical responsibility, related also to the loss and damage fund and also the other climate funds, you know, the official development assistance, which is the reflection of historical responsibility of colonialism, should not be touched or taken away by climate finance. It's a different historical responsibility. There is a carbon historical responsibility, but there is also colonial responsibility. So my message is just do the responsibility, the carbon historical responsibility, but not touching the responsibility of historical colonialism, you know, which is the trend right now. They start to, you know, take it away and so on. I think that's what I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very powerful, and I'm just really, really excited about not just the diversity of perspectives here, but the depth of your experience and the work that you've done either as researchers or directly in communities. And I think that we really need these exchanges between those who are doing research, those who are shaping policies, and those who are doing so much on the groundwork in their communities and really looking at what is happening. And also I think that we're seeing some really strong connections being made where we can't just talk about fossil fuel phase outs, we also have to be talking about what does it mean to have a renewable energy transition that takes into account potential consequences of that transition for local communities, especially unforeseen or unintended consequences sometimes. So thank you for these perspectives. What we'd like to do now is just open this up to a more dynamic exchange amongst our panelists before we go to our audience Q&A. And I have an opening question for you that's really talking about pathways for action from the perspective of civil society in the Global South and in the Global North. And then connecting those to energy policies. And sometimes I think we see how energy policies that are being shaped by the Global North can really affect and impact countries in the Global South. Sometimes it's also our local, national situation and policies. And so the question is, what pathways do you think we need for civil society organizations in countries from the Global South to take action, including when countries from the Global North shape or influence their energy policies? And then for our panelists from the Global North, how can you partner with Global South civil society organizations to enable these pathways? And I'd really like for you to just answer this, however, whatever you really want to speak to first, and then we'll keep this conversation going amongst panelists. So whoever would like to jump in, let's go for it. Yeah, TD, over to you.
Okay, the basic problem is actually women are not in decision making. So then what we need is discussions among women, what is actually our need. My examples of the mud pollution is in the area where people do not need additional electricity. But the geothermal megawatt are there to be built without people's needs, you know. So it means the energy policies should really based on the people's need, on the women's need, not based on the pattern or master plan or what government think, because it's not reflect at all. So it should be there. We should discuss among ourselves in our localities what we need.
Great, thank you. Who wants to jump in? Alba, over to you.
Thank you. I think something that has to be clear for our governments is that they need to listen. So it's not only about the what, it's about the how. They need to listen to feminist organizations in any country, and feminist organizations can connect on this as well. And from our case, we have been seeing some good changes. There have been a series of consultations on just transition. We insisted a lot on you need to go talk to other stakeholders. You need to go talk to the feminist organizations, and they actively, proactively ask them, to be on the table as well. And the same happened in a law that was launched, that was approved this summer, and that we are very happy to have as well. We had tried to make the connection with feminist organizations in countries where Belgium is extracting resources, and this was supposed to be a renewable energy law, so it's not only about fossil fuels, this was about biofuels, renewal. And so we insisted very much on, you have to listen into what is happening in the ground, because the reports that they were doing is, oh, there is no issue to be reported. And then once when they listened, and these listening spaces happen also during the COP, because activists can access also these spaces, they realized that there were impacts on their physical integrity, that there was gender-based violence, that there was impacts to food, to land grabbing, and so on. And now there's very specific mention in this law to actually look for women's rights also in the countries of extraction. I think this is also the result of this listening exercise, which is fundamental.
Great, thank you. And I'm really glad you brought up law as well, because I think that's a theme that I've been seeing a little bit more of during this COP amongst CSOs is how are we shaping law, and how do the grassroots especially have more access to participating in shaping of law and policy. Jonita, it looks like you'd like to go next.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what she just said on engaging women in decision making, but also when you're talking about energy, who in the global south, or who in the entire world is really not having the electricity or having access to energy? So centering those voices of these marginalized groups of people in the rural communities into the policy decisions, or even getting them involved, getting them to initiate these conversations, for me would actually be a game changer. But also when we talk about because for us in our countries always have very good policies. I think I went through some of the NAPs in different countries, and I realized that most of the African countries actually have very good plans or policies, but when it comes to implementation, it becomes the problem. So for me, when you have to create a policy, how do we from the start engage these groups of people, but also when it comes to implementation, how are we getting them involved? And the other thing for me is, right now we have very many energy solutions actually in Uganda. So much is happening with solar, and different companies are actually initiating these conversations and solutions around that. But realize that even when we have these alternative sources of energy, people cannot afford it. It's very expensive, right? So it's very difficult for somebody to actually be able to afford this, and therefore it still brings a barrier in access to energy. So for me, mainly is understanding better how do we position people that are experiencing energy poverty, the people that do not have access to energy, into the policy discussions. But also when you're having, how can we have community dialogues to understand better? Because then when you're creating a policy and you're seated in a room to just think about, oh, we read these different reports, but also there's something about researchers. So when researchers come to our countries, they kind of just come to take, how do we engage communities in this research to be able to have also the informal bit of research into the entire policies that we are creating. So for me, it's a bit of multidimensional.
All right. So well. First of all, I have a question for you, and then I have a follow-up along the research. But one follow-up for you, Jonita, is you bring up positioning these voices and getting these voices that haven't been heard into these policy spaces. But can you give a couple of your own concrete ideas for what do you think needs to happen, and in order for that person that you're thinking of to actually show up and be in that space and have their voice heard? Is that what you're picturing, or are you picturing somebody else writing about what's happening and then that being presented to policymakers? Can you give us a really clear illustration of, and then what needs to happen for those voices to be in those spaces in actuality and reality?
Yeah, so I know that in reality, the global north is assuming that when they engage the different governments, they are literally engaging the community. I feel like this is the thinking, but we also realize that there's a bit of a barrier between the communities themselves that are going through these particular situations to the government itself, because the foreign policies are aiming at getting into the country and then working with the government itself, the ministry, the state. But they are also ignoring that maybe if we kind of break down this barrier, we break down the channel of, you know, the government itself, to just go direct to the grassroots level and just not assume that our governments will involve community, because we don't know. They might be also having their selfish interests. So how do we get to know that there are actually policies that are engaging them and the communities are actually voicing their different views on what's happening? So for me, it's basically trust as well, like trusting communities directly to work with them, than thinking, oh, this particular minister is going to work with the communities themselves, to just kind of break this barrier. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And now I'd love to bring that over then to Annabelle, can you bring this full circle back to your thoughts on how this should be connected with the Dutch feminist foreign policy? What's being discussed right now?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to first of all say I completely agree, Alba, with what you were saying in listening, and I wanted to kind of extend that even further because it actually ties in very well to something that happened during the development of the feminist foreign policy. So the Dutch government did, on the surface, do a very nice stakeholder consultations. We could give input. There were stakeholder consultations in person for those of us based in the Netherlands. And then they did do a stakeholder consultation after Dutch civil society kind of said, well, you're missing out a key part of the conversation, which is civil society in the countries which you're talking about, the foreign countries. But it was really, it felt a bit last minute, it felt like a bit of an add-on. And I thought one thing I wanted to add and expand on Alba's point was listening on equal terms, because I think sometimes it's brought in as this kind of add-on extra at the last minute. You know, when a kind of project or policy has already been decided upon, and then it's added on. So I think it's really important that you're listened to, civil society, individuals are listened to or consulted or really brought on board from the very beginning stages, when you start to think that it's there's timelines, concrete timelines, clear targets, you have an idea with what's going to be done with the input you're giving, because I think that's really, there's listening, but are the governments really hearing? I wanted to add something also on policy coherence as well, because at the moment the Dutch feminist foreign policy is should only be kind of really mainstreamed throughout the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. How is that going to be implemented through the Ministries of Economy and Climate? You know, when it comes to issues of trade, how do we ensure that we're not giving with one hand and taking back with the other, kind of thing? Yeah, I feel like Jonita and Titi said it really well. You know, I think as civil society organizations in the Netherlands, we have this real privilege and a responsibility to stand in solidarity and ensure that, you know, we give also our voices up to the people who are really impacted by it. So I hope that answers your question, Rosalind.
Yes, Alba?
I wanted to build on that as well. Definitely sometimes we get consulted and then the name appears, but not what we said. And that's a big issue. But I wanted to go back to these spaces and to find the right balance between giving space also to activists and thinking about security, because this is something that, the women that we're in touch with, you know, we have had to, you know, put additional measures to create safe spaces, sometimes outside of the community, because there can be, you know, increases in violence after the consultations that we have. And we also know that sometimes the enterprises that we are after, they are attacking the activists as well, and they are even putting threats, you know, menace as well. And so, and sometimes it's to find the right balance and to, make sure that people are safe in those spaces, and who is, you know, giving the messages to which stakeholder and how everything is, you know, and safe.
Great, thank you. I think this really lends itself well to moving on to a discussion about partnerships, right? And how should there be partnerships in your individual views between Global North and Global South civil society organizations that really help to benefit this feminist and decolonial shaping of energy policies and climate policies. And so, and have you experienced some good partnerships along those lines? Have you partnered with other feminist organizations that have been beneficial? And if you haven't, what should that look like right now? So, TD, I'd love to know first from you, partnerships, are they working for you, and what would you like to see?
So a lot of partnership, actually. For example, the partnership among the CSO monitoring the green climate funds. We work together monitoring the GCF and also projects, and we provide contributions on situations when the projects will be is proposed to one of the country. So that's a lot of partnership on that level. And we also hope the partnership in following up what Annabelle said about the feminist ministry, foreign policy, something like that. So, I mean, it should be reflected in the decisions in the banks like the IFI, because I think the Netherlands has roles in decision making within the ADB, within the World Bank, within the Green Climate Funds. And there, you know, right now, the policy that we look is how they decide about a project, whether they also look at the benefit for women, also whether they look at the protection of women of the projects. So those policies should be reflected in that decision. And also the last one is actually the safeguard policy of the Asian Development Bank is now being consulted, and it's so bad related to women. You know, there's no mention about female-headed household. So in this context, how the feminist foreign policy in the Netherlands can also influence that the safeguard is improved, not diluted. So then I think in that spaces, feminist organizations in the North and in the South can work together, you know, to shape protection of women from the climate measure projects and also other activities.
Fantastic, thank you. So really mutually beneficial cooperation going on here. Who else would like to jump in on partnerships? And also I'd love, Alba, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on partnerships from that participatory research angle, and speaking perhaps a little bit also to what Joe Nito is bringing up about research and how we make sure it's inclusive.
Yeah. I would like to speak maybe about partnerships outside of the comfort zone of feminist organizations. Because I think to talk between ourselves, you know, it's not always, but sort of a given. But we need to partner with other organizations that are also in positions of power, and that are many times those who are having the dialogue with policymakers, especially on climate and energy action. And I'm really happy that some of our colleagues from the Climate Coalition in Belgium are here, because it's some of the linkages that we are trying to do as well. As feminists, we know what the issues are. How do we make sure that environmental organizations, you know, are not misogynistic, so are not homophobic, or are not racist? And this has been a very big issue. I mean, even coming more clear in the last recent years. So I think it's very important to also, you know, broaden the support to those that clearly also have a bit more power. And it's not always an easy conversation, but good to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. And Annabelle, I know that, so Titi was referencing back to the Dutch feminist foreign policy, and I'd love to hear, just based on what Titi had to say, some of your additional insights.
On partnerships. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really good question.
Or what outcomes do you hope for in terms of the feminist foreign policy, not just in terms of partnerships, but you think can be really relevant to Global South partners?
Well, first outcome would be actually having a concrete idea of what it's going to look like, because it's been on the go now for, well, as I say, since 2022. We had the Feminist Foreign Policy Conference in The Hague in November, which was, we kind of, I think, expected to see there's going to be a development of a handbook, a guideline for staff. So actually the first thing I would hope for is to actually see what it concretely looks like. And then, yeah, I suppose it would be really, I think what I mentioned about this, the Netherlands has really had this fantastic SDG 5 fund. They have, in some senses, been really forerunners in gender equality, gender funding. I think, sorry, I don't remember who mentioned it, I think Jonita, but about the trust. So really building up that trust basis, trust partnership with these Global South, so-called Global South organizations, because I think what we see right now is that there's this kind of partnership that's been built up between governments in the Global North, governments in the Dutch government and Dutch civil society. They quite often come to us or we go to them very often and they listen to us. But when we try to bring in this conversation of why don't you listen directly and build up those partnerships with the civil society organizations in other countries, they just come back with, we don't have the time, we don't have the capacity, when it comes to funding, the risk measures are different, so we trust you to. And I read something really fantastic, or actually I was on a part of a panel the other day, organization of a panel the other day, and someone said, really, why don't you let us learn? Why don't you let us learn by doing? Rather than assuming that we don't have the capacity to build up, to manage funding, to manage power in that way. So, a partnership, and as I mentioned, really on a basis of equals. I think that's the really core part, is not just coming there of we're a donor or a partner, but really we hold the power balance. It's that shifting of power that really needs, I think, would be for me what would really constitute a feminist, and to some extent addressing that power balance of decolonialism.
Great, and you brought up, okay, round of applause for that, thank you. So you brought up the word capacity there, and I'm wondering if that's kind of a key uniting issue here. Is we've talked about some pretty important listening exercises that need to happen, inclusiveness exercises that need to happen. But what does it take to actually have capacity to implement this? So let's make that our last question over to Jonita before we move to a Mentimeter and our Q&A with our audience. So audience members, please start thinking of your questions right now. And Jonita, over to you on capacity.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalind. I think I just wanted also to say something on partnerships. So I spoke about the We Are Tomorrow Globe partnership in the beginning. So it's a partnership between youth in the Global South and those in the Global North, specifically Netherlands. And there are over youth from 11 different global countries in the Global South. And we're trying to push the youth agenda. And so for me, this would be still an avenue to see how these policies can actually be implemented even in other countries, and also just share knowledge and information on that. So for me, also with the French embassy in Uganda is really supporting an intergenerational feminist movement, which is really, really cool. And they have involved so many of the youth-led organizations, women organizations, cutting across the different action coalitions as well. So it's really cool as well to see happen. And for me, these are some of the strong partnerships that need to really be strongholds in the conversation moving forward. So when you talk about capacity, I'll speak about capacity maybe on the youth side of things. So over and over again, we've tried to say, when we are trying to build, when you talk about the just transition, we are thinking about the green jobs, we are thinking about how can our communities really transition to cleaner energy. But the question I'm always asking myself is, how many people will be unemployed? and how many people will be employed, and who is actually positioned to take on these particular green jobs, and how many of our women can actually benefit from this transition. So for me, these are some of the questions that are always open. So when you talk about capacity, so Girls for Climate Action is working a lot with universities as well to make sure that the knowledge that students have can be also, they can work together with communities to create different solutions in energy, water, and food. And so with the expertise that they're getting from the formal system, they're also now working together with the informal system to come up with solutions that communities can embrace as well. So we have a 9 weeks program where we do a training, and in that training they come up with concrete solutions that can be replicated, can be scaled. But the most important thing is when you talk about capacity, we're also talking about where do we get finances to capacitate the different people to take up these positions. And this has been like the question that we've spoken about every other day, because the transition will come with a lot of funding that is needed. I know that we are talking about billions, but I really think we need trillions in this just transition to make sure that it's actually just like we say it. And also when you talk about the minerals, so we also work with communities whereby there was copper mining in the beginning, and so communities are now facing the different effects or impacts that come with this effluent getting into the water. And that means that we need to find a solution, and we are using microbes to make sure that the water is clean. But in this process, the people that are taking on even the purification of this water are not even women, because they do not have the capacities to actually do that. And also, for me, it's mainly how do we trust women with funds? How do you trust that their different small initiatives can actually be scaled up to feed the entire community? And how can it really become a solution that is groundbreaking for the entire country? But in case we don't trust them with funds and thinking, oh, the solutions they're having will end in the kitchen, then we'll still, for me, the transition can never happen if we don't really materialize whatever that the women are doing. So capacity building is important, very important, but comes with a lot of need for finances and trust as well.
Great, thank you. Round of applause for that. Okay, so we're going to kick off our audience Q&A with a Mentimeter. Are we ready for that Mentimeter? Okay, what is essential? The question, let's go back to the question. We want to hear from you. What is essential to make BENELUX policies feminist and decolonial? So everyone think about that for a second. What do you think is essential for making these policies feminist and decolonial? Maybe think back to what some of the things you've heard from our speakers. And now let's go to, all right, so you can use the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code. Audience, live stream audience, feel free to participate as well. I like speaking to the audience camera, so they're there.
They are.
Okay, they're there. They're there. Okay. And then who is going to tell us the results? You are. So Alba is going to tell us the results of the Mentimeter.
Yeah.
So let's give it a minute for everyone to respond. Oh no, are we not connecting to the internet? Who's able to connect to the internet? Okay, some of you. We'll give it a minute for you to connect. Alba, do we have responses coming in? Are you on?
We're not yet.
Okay. Or you can, you know what?
I was also thinking, yeah, it's the, but for the people following online, I don't know where the camera is. I know you're there.
It's right there. It's
okay,
right there.
that thingy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Gaia maybe to get some of the results. This is new technology for me. I feel like I'm getting outdated already. So just waiting for Gaia.
Okay, so let's give it 30 more seconds.
It's going. Yeah.
And then for anyone who isn't able to connect, you'll get to just, as you say, shout it out.
Yeah, we do it the old
yeah,
style.
Why not?
Direct finance to women.
Wait, why don't you just shout it right now?
Direct finance for the great project of Juanita, with no or very little interest rates, or so even better grants. Yes.
All right, thank you. And do we have responses coming through?
We have just 1 second. All right.
This is very exciting. Okay, here we go.
All right. Well, we don't have sentences, we have keywords, but I guess we can build on that. We have inclusive, it's a huge word coming. Frank conversations, youth, people-driven, intersectional, trust, poor, gender livelihoods, and I'm leaving the best for the last, kick out lobbyist.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Okay, now we're going to open it up to questions from you, the audience, for our panelists. So I will be standing up and handing over the mic to you to ask questions. So raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Don't be shy. Anything that comes to mind? Yes, right there first.
Hey, thanks. Oh, sure. Lara Mouse, UNEP WCMC, which is a biodiversity centre. So I'm coming to you from the climate and nature space. This is the first event where I've heard the word feminism, so bravo. There's talk of gender, but that's not exactly the same. I was really interested to hear about the feminist foreign policy, and I wondered, are there other places that are doing this? And what's its future in the Netherlands, given recent political events? Thanks.
Thank you. Annabelle?
Yeah, I was wondering, Rosalind, do you want to take a few questions or
No, let's take one at a time. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting question. I think it's also something that we have been considering after. So one of the governments, I think basically the first government which decided to adopt a feminist foreign policy was Sweden, which has now stepped away from that after the government change. So it is still to be seen. Obviously, there haven't been any coalition formed. There hasn't been a coalition formed in the Netherlands yet, so it's still very much to be seen. Actually, the next feminist foreign policy conference, the first was held in Germany. This one in the Netherlands held this year. The next one will be in Mexico. So I believe also one of the first Latin American countries to adopt feminist foreign policy. There are lots of different countries. I mean, I say lots. Maybe that's a bit ambitious. That's a bit over-optimistic. There are a growing number of countries, let's say, which are adopting them. I think one thing that is really interesting, and I think that's what I work for WECF, Women Engaged for a Common Future. We call ourselves an eco-feminist organization. That principle of feminism and gender and climate is really intertwined. And I think what, as feminist organizations, we also need to be very careful of is, let's say, holding governments accountable when they use this word feminism. Because I think it's what I've noticed, and I'm sure many of you might have done, is the speed with which some actors pick up our language, they adopt our terminologies and run with it. And I think that is really important to keep saying, you know, when you use this terminology, when you say you're going to adopt a feminist foreign policy, do you really, what do you mean by that? What do you, and that's fine, every person, every individual, every organization, every government can have its own definition of what feminism means to them, but I would say if it's not premised on this decolonial, intersectional, just, equitable, not just conducting, I saw something once of, the Dutch government does these analyses of their policies, projects, how does it implement it, how does it impact people. If it's not just, as they put it, adding woman and stir, which I thought was excellent. So, also holding governments accountable when they use that.
Thank you. Let's go to our next question. So who, I know, right over here, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sasha Gabizon. I'm a colleague of Annabelle from WCF. And I wanted to come to our colleagues from the Global South because, I mean, we have a historical responsibility in the Global North. We need to pay up much more for climate finance. Currently, we see a few $100 million going here. I think the Netherlands committed also 70 million or so to the loss and damage fund. We know the EU has a global gateway program which is supposed to be gender responsive and green. where they have 300 billion. But how much of that is really coming to the ground? And I heard you say, Juanita, that the funding isn't there, and when it's there, it's too expensive. So we know we have been pushing for this idea of direct finance as grants or as loans, but with very low interest. Should Benelux really maybe make that a focus? Should they, instead of paying for these very big hydrogen fuel, programs or so, should they really focus on getting direct finance to the local women farmers, and so that they can install solar energy, so that they can work on the cook stoves, and would that work? Let's see. And of course, we would like to hear the same from Titi.
Great. So Jonita and then Titi.
I think when you talk about direct funding, I think the capitalistic way of doing things is, I don't know why it's been a problem to actually give direct funding, but I know that feminist organizations are actually changing that. Feminist funders are trying to get money direct to the people, but it shouldn't be just the feminist organizations. I feel that now, as you've said again, a lot of pledges have been made, money is flowing around, and we've had billions, we've had so many pledges. But also even on the first day when they said, oh, loss and damage fund, oh, people are pledging, me and my team were thinking, okay, so how do we get this money, And when you ask yourself that question, you actually don't know the answer, because you don't know when it's going to come, you don't know who will have it, and you don't know what are the criteria and if our women actually have or qualify for that particular fund. So for us, it's mainly trying to remove the barriers of access to money. I know that also the institution that is hosting the loss and damage fund is still we are not sure if it will be loans, if it will be grants, and also even when they say, oh, it's not going to be loans, it will be grants, we don't know which organizations will be eligible for this amount of money and how much will actually go down to the people. But also most times it's still about how our countries are positioned, how the bureaucracy works, and how true the leaders are to make sure that the people can actually benefit from this loss and damage fund or adaptation funds or the climate financing to invest in the different initiatives that women are doing. So I would still say that the different solutions that communities are doing need a government that can trust that they can actually deliver on a bigger scale to be able to gain from it. Because then they look at the big energy solutions. They don't think about these small solutions that can actually be scaled up, only because I don't know if it's the system itself. That's why I think it will go back to how I'm saying more of the need for system change, where we have women also getting involved in the policies and being part of the committees that are actually giving out this particular fund, because we don't know how many women are also on this fund or on this committee to give out these funds, and also if they represent the voices of the people on the ground, or they represent the research that they see in papers and on the internet. So who is involved? And how much trust do they have for organizations that are working at the grassroots level, the women as well, the farmers, and how much is there for them to actually get, and in which what is the deal? It's mainly what is the deal, and how much, or how do both parties actually benefit from it? Because we see also with Girls for Climate Action, it's been a lot of hard time getting funding. We reached at a stage where we said, we're just going to do this because we are the ones suffering and nobody's suffering. People are sleeping well. For us, we are suffering, so we need to actually just get up and work on anything that you have to. Funds will find us along the way. But of course, you can only do little. You can only do little if you have mega funds, but you can do much, because in the last year when the French government actually got us on this project, we managed to train about 60 businesses, green businesses in different sectors, water, food, smallholder farmers, and now we are getting into mentorship for these particular women to be able to see that they also employ other people in this particular green business to be able to scale in different countries and communities as well.
Great.
So it was because of that trust that we are able to do the work that we are doing at the moment.
Thank you. It's a really powerful example, Jonita. And Titi, I'd like to bring it over to you.
Okay, so we really hope that the loss and damage fund will be increased and in form of grant. And I think there's still a lot of discussions needed on how to channel it. Because right now we know it is pledges, and you never know how much will be the delivery. If we look at the experience of the other climate finance, the delivery is very little compared to the pledges or commitments. So I can speak, because loss and damage fund is not clear yet, but I can speak about the green climate funds, which is also celebrated highly before as is really something to help the developing country and so on and so on. So one example is Indonesia has received 13 projects of green climate funds money through various accredited entities. But you see, 80% of millions of money from the GCF is for equity investment. So it means it is for other financial institutions without any information where the money will go later on in the sub-projects. So it is really addressed to financial institutions, to big projects and so on, and very little, and we don't know yet whether the women, the community affected will receive. That's the experience. It is because of the process, of the structures, and so on. And can you imagine the micro scale of the green climate funds is $10 million US. So how community can manage $10 million US? So therefore, what we're thinking right now, there should be a grant mechanism sitting in the secretariat of the GCF, particularly small grant for the community so they can access directly, not sitting in any of accredited entities, because then there's a lot of another interest. But the small grant for community should sit in the secretariat of the Green Climate Fund. At least we can monitor that. And I hope also that within the loss and damage, there can be also a grant mechanism that really dedicated to the community. It's difficult if it is through the governments because, corruption issue, this and that,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Round of applause. So I think we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to take it to, we're going to ask each of our speakers for a set of action points. And I will start with Alba, but I just want to, before I start with Alba, I just want to say that just in terms of linking this discussion to what we're hearing right now at COP28, I'm hearing a lot of words like participation, listening, inclusion, and also references to how are we thinking about the reality on the ground as we implement global solutions and global actions. And yet, I don't know how well that's being reflected right now in the negotiations. And so perhaps that is one of our biggest take-homes today is really making sure that global policy and the processes that we're going through to shape global policy is reflective of what's needed by people on the ground, by local communities, indigenous communities, grassroots, and youth. So I'll turn it over now to action items, and we're just going to go down the road, 2 minutes from each speaker. And Alba, can you start us off, your action points?
I think to link it to what I was presenting at the beginning as well, it's very important to get systematically gender disaggregated data linking to climate policies, climate issues, energy policies, and energy issues. That way, not only we can have better policies, but we understand why some of the decisions that we are making are also a feminist decision to make, such as the fossil fuel phase out. I think we should repeat it at least 3 times during this side event so that it stays in the text. Phasing out fossil fuels is also a feminist issue because of all the issues around pollution, around the extraction, and around the crisis that is creating. And to better understand that, having the right data and having the right data in partnership with feminist organizations working around the globe, it's a fundamental thing to keep on doing.
Great, thank you. So the right data. And Annabelle, over to you.
Well, Alba took one of mine already, or we share the same one about, reiterating that. I've forgotten all of the Fs now, but the fast, full, forever, feminist, funded, fossil fuel phase out, that has to be number one, I think. When it comes to, as I say, the green energy transition, there is no just energy transition if it comes at the expense of territories and lands, bodies and women's rights, human rights in the global south, so-called global south. That cannot happen. And I don't know, would it be too bold to just say hand over the money to the people who know how to use it best? I think that's, really committing to those 4 Rs, as I mentioned: resources, rights, representation, reality check, and the reality check listening to the communities, the grassroots, frontline communities who are impacted by, who are most affected by the climate crisis and who have the solutions. They're not victims, they're not just vulnerable, they are active agents of change. So listening to them and prioritizing their needs, their perspectives and their voices.
Yes, I think it's a feminist and decolonial policies panel, so I think we're expected to be bold. So great, thank you. Joanita.
Yeah, I think where she stopped on financing, I think very, very important to fund, to resource different community hubs where solutions are, and make sure that these are scaled up and can grow into solutions that we are all looking out for. And also the second thing is protection of environmental defenders, because in Uganda right now there's the East African crude oil pipeline that's being built, and 20 students right now are in prison for a while now because they were on the streets with placards. So it's very scary for us to even go on the streets because you don't know how you'll get out of there. So I think there's need to protect communities as well, protect youth that are striking or demonstrating on the different fossil fuel companies and calling them out. And the last thing for me is really inclusion, including when it comes to energy policies, feminist policy, decolonizing, including people that are the front lines is very important as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joanita. And I'm really grateful that you brought up that point about environmental human rights defenders, especially because we know that there have been many policies sweeping the world that are anti-protester, especially anti-environmental protester. But in addition to that, one of the great things that's come out of this COP, I think, has been more the connections between the work on the Convention for Biological Diversity and the work with the UNFCCC. So joining nature and climate, and I hope everybody here knows that the Global Biodiversity Framework has a specific target that mentions protections for environmental human rights defenders, so it's also great to see those things linked more. But Titi, over to you.
Yeah, so inclusive can only be done if the other party knows. So our main target, but work right now is inform the community, inform the women that's what is happening here, what decision at the global level, how it will affect their life. If they say there is a loss and damage fund, we need to inform there's some money to pay not your suffering when you move because of the climate change. We need to inform them so they really know what is their right, because they're entitled to get the funds, they're entitled to get the support and so on. So without knowledge, they only think that's the goodwill that they suffer. But we need to inform, to explain, so they can mobilize, articulate what they need, and we also inform if they defend their land, if they ask for compensation, that is their rights, and they are protected because of that.
Great, thank you. So another big round of applause for our panelists, everyone. I can't really. And I want to thank our partners again, who are hosting this, WCF and Oxfam International, as well as our hosts from the BENELUX Pavilion. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to closing words from Alba. So Alba, words of closing.
very, very quickly also joining your thank you. This wouldn't be possible without all the collaborations that have happened up to the last minute. And thank you to UN Women as well and Generation Equality Forum to accepting to moderate this. I think that's very helpful, and also in amplifying to our amazing colleagues from WCF, those that are here, those that are not here. To AXI also and Titi for responding to our very urgent request, and Joanita and Girls for Climate Action as well. And also the Oxfam colleagues that are not here, but I think they are online, and they have also been working tremendously on this. And many thanks to the Pavilion of Benelux for giving us the voice. I know from experience that this is heard at some point at Sub-Summit history, so it's very great that we had this space, and I hope many more to come.
Thank you. And thank you to you for joining us today, and thank you to our online audience.